So how do you balance the need for like data privacy then with the need to derive actionable insights from the data?
So I love that question because it's sometimes there's not such a big trade-off. We tend to, of course, like this is the classic conversation that the luxury that I have in my position where I'm both, building product and also client facing, where of course the clients will come and ask you for the data, right? But the reality is, even if you were to give them the data, they may not have the full capacity to take benefit of the data, right? And so like my thinking around data privacy is that we take it with a lot of responsibility, right? Ultimately today, I am a little bit of like personally the paranoid, right? Where I'm like, okay, there is no privacy. Actually, everybody has my data at this point, I'm pretty sure. Thankfully, I don't have anything to hide. But at the same time, like, as a consumer, and also in the US, consumers tend to have a lot of power. I do believe in the value of privacy, and I do want to try to opt in terms of whenever I actually want my information to be shared or not. And I think there's a lot more that is coming into play, into regulation that is really going into that direction. Of course, Europe is definitely ahead of the US in that direction, but in the US it's also important. The California Act, there's different acts that definitely put that into big play. And in my job, adhering to data privacy has been at the front and center of everything that we do. So in this case, the way it translates to our products is coming up with the right aggregation and the identification methodologies. And that sometimes is something that is evolving because it depends on what the product that you're putting in the market is stable or it's actually granular and it's dynamic. And so understanding how your techniques are actually resilient and you're still distilling the right level of insights, even when you're not level of granularity individual, but your level of granularity may be a group of individuals, a cluster of individuals, a cluster of entities. How do you really invest the right time in establishing what is an insight, right? And what's a meaningful insight, and what is statistically relevant if you think about it from a statistics term. So going back to like, how do you enforce it, right? So thinking about, okay, how do you adhere the right way to data privacy? I think there's a lot of mechanisms. We have established a set of controls that we found to be quite helpful. So it's almost like, how do we delineate the standards of like, the minimum level of aggregations that we can work with in order to kind of render insights in the form of a dashboard to a client, for example. I think that establishing those rules is actually helpful because then as you work with your data scientists and your engineers, they have a clear set of parameters to run the coding and to generate like the trends. But I love the challenge of like, okay, let's play with the boundaries, right? Let's understand what level of granularity still ensures that no customer is identified and no entity is identified, but at the same time, like, would I really want to go at that level of granularity and say something that is meaningful? Like, for example, we have many use cases, right? So think about it like, okay, I want to use my underlying data assets to distill the insights that would tell me how to optimize my staffing. That's one of our use cases. And so for that, I typically like to see for all of my stores, at the time that the customers come in and at time that they transact, and how is that evolving over time. And that I will also like to guide not only my staffing, but my store hours. Reality is that knowing the name or the last name of the customer that comes is very irrelevant for making that strategic business decision. I just need to know the overall, peaks. And it seems like Fridays at 5 p.m. I have 25% more sales than Saturday at 9 a.m. And I want to make sure that that's relatively consistent and therefore allocate the shifts of my personnel in that same direction. And that's different in this other store. So my point is, it's of course granularity is helpful in some ways, but it's not always helpful in the answer for the strategic decision that you need to make company. So I do think that yes, there's a balance. Of course, in some cases you will have the curiosity to get beyond the level of the insight. But I love to challenge even, the clients that I talk to in a good way, because to the extent that we can answer the business question that is being asked, I feel like adhering to data privacy is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the desirable thing to do, right? And so there's also two more things that I wanted to add to this answer. We invest quite a lot in trying to figure out what ways we can take as different rules to prevent potential, privacy issues. Thank God we haven't had any. But like, for example, we try to distill from the raw data that we have access, data that we are not going to use, right? So there's data fields that we are not using, right? Like when we get our data feeds, instead of getting the full raw data feeds, there are fields that we don't get on purpose, right? It's like, hey, my team is not going to get access to social security numbers, right? My team is not going to get access to, and you can call it, like, there's a few fields that are highly sensitive that only getting access to those, even if you were to get hacked and it's nothing related to you, that would be a problem, right? And that would be a bad situation for the firm. So it's almost like also how you think, going back to your question on data infrastructure, how do you create a data infrastructure that can also help you prevent some problems that may result, in a bad position for the firm that nobody really wants, because those are never going to be insights that we're going to share. So there's a ways in which we take further measures, further help us get into a situation where aggregated and clustered insights are not only informative of the strategies, but also we're preventing, a situation that nobody really wants to face by limiting access to certain fields. And another field that I'm going to call attention to is the card number, right? So instead of us getting access to, because we use payments data, so card numbers are also quite sensitive. And so in order for us to not have to deal with that, we basically received access to a tokenized card number. So it's a number that you're not able to decode. It's still unique, therefore I can still use it, as a joint key for important logic that I have put in place, but I'm not gonna able to actually look at it and know what the number is, and they don't have any mechanism for that.
Yeah, no,